Bill, thank you so much for for joining us today here at Bold Culture, a culture for our new Bold Voices series. I'd love to start with you telling the audience a little about yourself, your background, and your journey. How did you get into marketing and advertising, and what is your focus now?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I'll start by saying it's a pleasure to be here with you, and really looking forward to this conversation. This was pretty much the going to be the highlight of my day. So I'm glad that we're having an opportunity to spend this time together. I'll try to be as brief for my background because it's actually all over the place, and I don't know how much that will serve your audience to hear all of it.
Feel free to go
Um,
as deep as you're comfortable within your group.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I'll pick up on the marketing piece first. It's in that that's unique in the sense that I'm not by training a marketing and advertising person. I actually spent most of my academic and early parts of my career engaged in finance. So I was a trader for Goldman Sachs. I spent almost 7 years there on the equity trading desk and really transitioned to the world of marketing and more so strategy as I developed a practice with friends running a multicultural agency called Free DMC. We also published a magazine, which was a culture and lifestyle magazine called Free Magazine. I started a conference in 2010 called Influencer Conference, which grew to be a global platform around influence as a culture. So this was before what influencer culture has typically been thought of. So it's been really a long path toward really engaging, I would say honestly, less around marketing and advertising and more around culture and strategy. So in my current role with MediaVillage, those are really the areas that I focus on as someone who considers himself a cultural anthropologist and strategist. So I'm really focused on culture, humanity focused design and issues like that.
I love that. I actually have two questions that came from your background here. My first question really is what that transition from finance to, let's say, marketing looked like, because there are many people who, come into marketing and advertising in many different ways. But, from finance to advertising marketing is definitely an interesting journey. So what was that transition like for you? I know we have quite
Yeah,
a few people
it
who've done.
was actually an accidental journey. When I left the firm, I just knew in that moment that that work wasn't the work that was really serving me. And I wanted to explore and do other things. And so when I left Goldman, I didn't leave it with a plan that I was going to do marketing or advertising or anything like that. I actually linked up with fraternity brothers and friends of mine from Howard, and everything grew quite organically from there. So the transition was one that wasn't a direct linear route. It was a lot more circuitous, as I like to say. And I think really if there's a lesson to be learned from that is that one can plan as best they can, but oftentimes best laid plans of mice and men, and you just find yourself exploring things. Really, if you have a healthy dose of curiosity, you'll find things and things will find you.
I love that. And one shout out to Howard University. I am a Morehouse graduate.
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
love that HBCU energy there, of course.
Always.
I'm not going to talk about whose homecoming is best right now,
Oh,
but
because
I
it's Howard's. We already know that. So there's no need to even have that conversation.
I'll give it to you here. I'll give it to you here off of respect for sure. Um,
Absolutely, brother.
I think that the second question into your journey, you talked about culture, and I'd love for you to tell us what's your definition of culture. What does culture mean to you?
Absolutely. Culture is been defined many different ways. And one of the things I like to tell folks is that culture really acts on us quite invisibly in the sense that it's something that it's incredibly powerful. It's something that we can recognize, but it's not often apparent. It is very much like language. Like all of us in this moment, we're speaking English, we're communicating in that way, but we're not really thinking about the language that we're using. We just understand it. And culture operates very much like that, but it's both formal and informal in the way that it operates. So that's really how, when I'm talking about culture and getting people to understand it, that's what I kind of try to drive home, that it is in many ways invisible, but that doesn't make it any less essential. And it operates both formally and informally, which is critical to understand about how it plays a role in our lives and in our business lives in particular.
And that definitely segues us into some of your experience as an agency executive. And as an agency executive who identifies as a Black man, of course, I'd love to talk to you about your experiences in connecting brands to multicultural audiences.
Absolutely.
What are some of the lessons learned about brand or agency interests in knowledge of or connection to culture, particularly Black culture?
Yeah.
Is there interest? What knowledge is there so far? Just given your experience.
Yeah, given my experience, and this might be very different from other folks that you talk about, or talk to rather, I think the reality is that a lot of agencies don't really understand culture. They're not designed to, and I would make the argument that they're really not that interested in culture. Their work, by the nature of the agency structure, is far more transactional and short term. And culture is something that requires long-term thinking. It requires you to make a real investment in the people that understand it. If I, for example, wanted to learn to speak Farsi, I would have to understand that that would take me a long time to do, and I would have to engage with, hire, empower those who spoke the language. And agencies, for the most part, are not as interested in that type of deep work toward understanding culture. So in an agency framework, culture becomes like a shorthand for deeper work. It's almost like when you think about it, I'm going to date myself here, Cliff Notes. I don't know if people still use Cliff Notes anymore.
Yeah.
There's probably something else that's more digital and easier to find, Wikipedia perhaps. But a lot of agencies and folks engaged in the business are using Cliff Notes, for what they think will pass for some deep insight or understanding of the culture, but it doesn't really accomplish that, and these are the opinions of one, but from things I've seen, I feel pretty comfortable in saying
Absolutely. I'm
that.
like, amen, amen. I love that. Cliff Notes is such the great analogy for what we're even seeing here. So you're absolutely right. On the client side, you know, is it different on the client side? Do you think there's interest on the brand side and maybe there's not that agency interest, agency capability has not caught up? What are you seeing there?
I think it would depend on the client. Every client is different. So as much as it's easy for us to generalize in these particular moments, I do want to not totally do that. But I think the challenges that the client would face and the agency would face, they're sort of the same. The agency is only empowered but so much to direct the client in a different direction. And oftentimes, what I've heard, particularly when it has to do with culture or diversity, and those are kind of intertwined ideas, the pushback will be, well, the client isn't asking for that, or, the client has kind of pushed us in another direction. So both parties sort of work in unison to blame the other where it's convenient. So I think it's really both sides, same coin, reluctant to deal with the realities of a changing society, reluctant to deal with the way in which the business is really changing, and in many ways, culture / multicultural or things like that are considered afterthoughts. to what is considered a general market way of thinking. And general market is just fancy word for white, right? So
Yeah,
anything that is different from that is an afterthought, regardless of whether or not that's where you should be spending your time, money, energy, or any of those other things.
absolutely. This is you mentioned something around, of course, it being a shared responsibility. And we definitely see that just from our conversations, both on the brand and agency side, right? It's either one possibly blaming the other, or there's a true lack of awareness. And you mentioned this
Mhm.
earlier. That is almost something where it's a mission to kind of educate and teach sometimes. But sometimes that's also an excuse for not
Absolutely.
doing the work as well. Um,
Absolutely.
and so let's talk about, for people who are looking to do the work. You are the executive director of advancingdiversity.org, which is a part of MediaVillage. What is Advancing Diversity, and what do you hope to provide to individuals through this platform?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, advancing diversity has morphed and taken on a lot of different shapes over the past almost decade
Mhm.
since Jack Myers, who's the CEO and founder of MediaVillage, started to design and build a platform. It started with a focus on women within advertising and marketing, and it has had an evolution over the years to include many different affinity groups, for lack of a better word, including obviously a focus on Blacks and African Americans, on Latinos, on LGBTQ, on older folks. Aging has been a key demographic, younger folks, first millennials, and now Gen Z. So really advancing diversity.org is the industries, one of the industries really epicenter areas that focuses on diversity in the widest way in which you can define it. It's meant to both be a resource for those who are within the industry, to learn from one another, to find best practices. And it's also a way for us to support other organizations who are also doing work around diversity and multicultural outreach. And it's a place that we would hope will be a portal for those who are interested in joining our industry to find that place of belonging. We have our Advancing Diversity Week, which is coming up September 20th through September 23rd. And our theme is from inclusion to belonging. And we want all of our work to be about really showcasing that the industry is a place for talent across the spectrum, particularly with the focus on Gen Z and people of color.
Absolutely. In full disclosure, I am a former and always connected member of MediaVillage. So I love the work that MediaVillage
Thank
and
you very
Advanced
much.
University is doing, particularly you, Philip, in extending the work. Just the amazing content. Check out the pool from Philip McKenzie, which we're going to talk about soon. But that's just a wealth of information there that people just should start looking at MediaVillage.com now. And I'm just going to say that, put out my
Thank you.
promo from MediaVillage.
Promos are always welcome.
um, when we talked about, of course, focusing on race, particularly Black people, over the past year, especially after the unfortunately murders of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Tony McDade, and others, the media, advertising, and marketing industries stepped up transparency of their internal representation, no matter how it looked at that time or at this time, and pledged more external focus and support on Black audiences via media dollars, creative assessments, and more. If any, that you have in mind, what are some initiatives that are internal or external that you believe are leaning in a positive direction? I'll stop there.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an interesting and tough question. I'd probably push back on the premise a little bit in the sense that,
Mhm.
um, yeah, I could likely like really rack my brains and come up with some really good things that folks are doing. And this isn't to say that people aren't continuously doing good work. many of the organizations that we are inducting into the Advancing Diversity Hall of Honors this year, the AAF, the 4As, the ANA, I'm not going to name everybody, but just to name three off the bat, are doing really important work. Many of our member companies are continuing to do work, whether that's on their talent pipeline or what have you. I've written and published work focusing on the things that they're doing. But when given an opportunity to reflect on where the industry is, I would surmise it by saying that it's not enough. And there has been no matching of the platitudes and announcements as yet. The transparency still isn't there. There are still many of the large agency holding companies that have not released their diversity data in terms of how many people, particularly Black people, they are hiring or working with. The C-suites still look almost uniformly white, with the exception of, as usual, the diversity and equity and inclusion officer. And that's not enough, and so I'm loath to give credit where I think there's still incredible work that needs to be done. And the longer it takes us from the events of 2020, the harder it will be to hold people accountable, because business will continue to move forward. And we'll hear this like, oh, we're working on it, or we're doing enough, or, the announcement's coming, or this is happening. And so we can't really take the pressure off. And so I'm going to shift the focus a little bit,
I
and
love it.
and ask that that we have to hold folks accountable, right? And every opportunity that I have to do that, I'm going to do it.
Absolutely. Definitely love that. And this is actually the second part of a question, which is what's not working. And what I'm hearing right now is, just the empty pledges many times, or the one-sided pet pledges, every time there's conversations on diversity and inclusion, especially in representation, there's a rush to kind of flood the bottom, if you will. I wouldn't say that, but entry level with Black people for just a moment, right? And then start leaving. Of course, we know they start leaving in mid-level, senior level roles. And because there's no opportunity or just no support there, among many other reasons, are there any other things that you're seeing, this is just not working or not sustainable as well?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it isn't working, right? Because none of this is new. Like, it didn't take if it took the murder of George Floyd for people to look around their workplace and understand that these were not inclusive environments, then those people were, quite frankly, either insane or disinterested, or both, right? Or some combination of those two things. These things were obvious. They were obvious to me when I got out of college in 1994 and started working at a bank. It was obvious to me when I left business school and started working at Goldman Sachs. It's been obvious every step of my career. I've walked into many of these buildings in different capacities and sat in rooms where I've been the only Black person. So, and this wasn't a long time ago. This was like 2019. And so, I'm not going to pretend that most of these people are disingenuous in their concern for what the industry will look like, because this is ultimately about power. Any conversation that involves diversity and inclusion that does not include power is not a serious conversation, because there's a finite amount of jobs, there's a finite amount of opportunities, there's a finite amount of clients. And guess what? Some of y'all not gonna have them seats no more. And that's just the reality of the situation. Like, sorry, not sorry, but some of y'all shouldn't have them jobs anyway because you're mediocre. And that's the reality of the situation. But we want to pretend that everyone who has these jobs like deserve it. And so there's this false notion of mediocrity, or rather meritocracy, that exists within corporate America that just isn't true. So the advertising and marketing world isn't new to that, but many of the people sitting in these seats are under the notion that like, oh yeah, of course I'm the CMO because I work really hard for it. And it's like, well, that's debatable. you know?
Yes, or did you know it someone, or was this like something that was natural because of the lack of diversity and inclusion at the company? I love that fact that you mentioned on no conversation about diversity and inclusion is a conversation if it doesn't center power. You're absolutely right. We think about economic power and the access, even to economic freedom that C-suite individuals get, from bonuses to just their regular base salary. And we really think about, this is what we're not providing or not providing access to when we hold people out of those positions. That, of course, is connected to many other things that are, held out for sure. So I just love that point. Now, I do want to talk about those who are in the industry. It's definitely not enough. But those who are in the industry, you are in some ways connected to, definitely. And so I love to talk about the lessons that you've learned from the Black executives who you've spoken with on things like the pool or even before within your career. What are they challenged with right now, and what are they excited about?
Yeah, I think they're mostly, and again, these are not all uniform observations, but I always come back to like someone like France Fanon, right? Like, you know, black skin, white mask, we're in these realities where, or code switching or any of these number of things. Like these are the things that come up routinely in my conversations with folks, in the sense that there's the outward facing like rhetoric, and then there's like the behind the scenes reality. So a lot of the folks that I speak to, they are privately quite like exhausted and tired of having these conversations. Because if you're someone like myself who is not old, but I've been around, for quite a bit, and there's people senior to myself. So they've been having these conversations likely their entire career. And quite frankly, I'm tired of having them, right? And they continuously fall on deaf ears. So what I hear most, and it's not always like gonna be front and center in the pool or in public conversations, is like a frustration and a tiredness that they're still forced or faced with having these conversations, because these are things that, again, everybody knows, so this isn't, unfortunately, a business case, which is why I try to not make the business case. Because if I look at like Harvard Business Review, not saying that Harvard is the arbiter of all things important, but people like to refer to it, right? So we'll use it as a proxy for any number of other conversations. I could do a simple search of Harvard Business Review articles about the business case for diversity, and there's going to be articles going back at least 10 years, probably longer depending on their archives. So everyone knows the business case. Everyone knows the stakeholder case for diversity makes your organization better and shareholder value and blah, 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 blah. They don't care about that. So therefore, you're fighting a battle on a different level. Like we're trying to use logic, and there is no logic to this. And that's what I hear most from Black professionals and executives across the industry. It's a lot of frustration as to what they're excited about. I don't know, to be honest. And I'm not really going to speculate as to what is exciting. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't consider myself particularly excited. I would consider myself like focused, and dedicated, because this is work that goes beyond a title and any particular organization. This is work that I'm going to do until I'm in the grave or they put me in one. right? So it doesn't really matter. I don't need to be excited to do this work. My life depends on this work. Your lives depend on this work. So this work will be done. I don't need to be excited about it.
It's a life work. I completely agree. I completely agree with that. Before we go into our next session, I definitely wanted to stay on this and think about, some solutions here and talk about ways in which, people are dealing with it. If there are immediate solutions, Black executives who may or may not even have the jobs of diversity, equity, and inclusion as well, because we're seeing that, some Black people in different roles are being pulled in to be the anti-racist ad, checker, if you will, to make sure that their company is doing the right thing and not as biased, but not being paid for that work,
Mhm.
right? So there's still extra labor. It reminds me of Toni Morrison, which I will not butcher the quote, but of course, the function of racism is to distract, right? And so I'm wondering, for any person in a corporate world, particularly Black people in a corporate world, how do we immediately, do you have any thoughts on how do we immediately deal with still showing up, still focusing on the work that we have to do, but also bearing what we can, if that makes sense,
Yeah,
as far as from the journey?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I had the clean answer to that, man, I'd be walking on water, which I definitely don't do. Yeah, that's a challenge, to be completely honest. I don't know if I've solved that for myself, much less solved it for other people.
Yeah.
Like it is truly ebb and flow. Some days are more encouraging than others. Part of our journey is in the joy of doing this stuff. And joy is not synonymous with happy, right? Like you can feel joy even in moments of struggle. And I think one of the things that has typified the Black experience in the diaspora has been finding joy even in difficult moments. I mean, that's the crux of culture right there. And that's why it's so hard for folks to really understand it, because they've not lived it. And so they don't feel it in the same way. Right. So, me and my boys could be really having like a tough time and still find humor in that, still find experiences in that. Like even, I think about like Juneteenth, which is a completely like appropriated thing. Like it only took like 1 year for that to become like completely appropriated and useless, right? Um, and we still find joy in kind of like pushing back on the appropriation of something like Juneteenth, right? In a way that they're not going to understand that, right? Because everyone that's mainstream, and by mainstream I mean white, right? They now feel like a badge of honor in like talking about Juneteenth, for example, right? Like, oh, Juneteenth is now a day off for us. And I'm like, day off for you, right? Like Juneteenth should be a day off for just Black people, right? And like y'all should
Yeah.
have to go to work. We should get the day off and get paid double, right? Like that would be the most perfect Juneteenth ever, right? But until we do that, like I'm gonna clown this because y'all just took it over to make yourselves feel better, and that doesn't discredit the activists and the people who work to make it a holiday, but what they've done isn't what has it become, right? So I say all that to say that we got to find joy in all of this, how we show up each day and kind of deal with it. I don't know how to
Yeah.
prescribe that, right? Because like I said, I don't know how to do it myself all the
Yeah.
time, but I know it comes through community. It comes through like finding each other, and also comes through being honest with
Yeah.
one another, right? Like we got to look out for one another. If we don't, nobody else is going to,
I hear
you
that.
know?
And I love to talk about, we always place the onus on us. If you have any thoughts of ways that white people, people who are not Black, right, can support people of color, Black people in the workplace, what would be those top 2 or 3 things?
Yeah. And this kind of speaks to the power conversation, right? Like, step aside, like that's the number one thing that someone can do right now is like not just step aside, but like actively promote and push that Black person in a role,
Yeah.
right? Like that's really what it ultimately takes is like, look, I'm CMO, I'm leaving, and the job is going to this person, right?
Yeah.
Like there's got to be a succession plan in place or things are never going to change because they'll use the status quo as a way to keep you out of the role, right? Because that happens all the time. It'll be like, well, we would give you the job, but you never really did the work before, so you can't get the job. It's like, well, if I didn't do the work, then how am I going to get a job? It just becomes this like circle, right? And we got to break that circle by circumventing the rules, right? Because the rules only protect the powerful. So I'm not interested in the rules, right? We got to make new rules. And that's part of the culture, right? Because we've always had to do that, right? We've always had to find a way to hustle. And then they appropriate even that, right? And, like hustle has become the face of people who don't know nothing about hustling because they've never really had to, not in a way that means anything. It just becomes something to put on like a Instagram post or to kind of go to Burning Man and talk about, but like you ain't really hustling.
I love it. I'm over here, amen, because I don't want to cut it in your audio because I need them to get this absolutely sponsorship and really stepping aside. That's what we're seeing, even within certain clients that we work with. There's, of course, the opportunities are scarce. One, you have 10 EVPs possibly who've been there for 20 years or so, and they're not leaving unless they are, fired or that they leave themselves and really place someone else in. And so how are we setting up guardrails and systems? And I loved your point on breaking the rules that particularly are set there for the powerful, to keep the
Yeah.
powerful in their place. So that's a perfect.
Yeah. Because the rules very rarely apply to them.
Yeah.
Right. The rules only apply to others.
Yeah.
Right. Because I've seen that in my career all the time. I call it the benefit of the doubt. Right. Like they consistently get the benefit of the doubt. Right. So if you were really good at like marketing umbrellas, they'll say like, oh yeah, of course you can run a movie studio. And you're like, how'd you get that job? Right. Like, but if you're the Black person who's been like marketing umbrellas for the past 10 years, and now there's an opening to run the umbrella company, they'll be like, well, we really would have liked for you to like sell more umbrellas on like Wednesday. Like there'll be some arbitrary like reason as to why you can't do the job, even though you have like the expertise and the knowledge, because no one gives you the benefit of the doubt, right? Whereas like I've been in so many rooms where someone's getting like talked about for a promotion or a new assignment. And if anyone says, oh, well, they never did that before, the next answer is always like, well, they're really smart, so I'm sure they'll pick it up. Like that's the benefit of the doubt argument, right? Like we need folks to start to make benefit of the doubt arguments for us, right? Because that's the only thing that will change. Like we all can't be the most perfect candidate, right? Because they're not the most perfect candidate.
Yeah.
Or things wouldn't be as terrible as they already are, right? Like
yeah.
Somebody approved that Pepsi ad a couple years ago and it wasn't us.
It wasn't us. Oh my gosh, we placed that in our Black paper ad. It's so in so many others. Mary J. Blige atop a BK, a Burger King, table talking about crispy chicken. All of those things, and that's just more historical. But I love the benefit of the doubt argument because that sponsorship, it literally is the sponsorship that we just don't see, and it's
Absolutely.
the pushing of the goalpost for Black people that's just so tangible, and it really sums up everything that we're seeing within the industries, unfortunately. Let's talk about you trying to get some people some jobs as well as inspire some people as well. There is a new addition to the Advancing Diversity family, which is Advancing Diversity Week, which you mentioned before, happening September 20th to the 23rd. Can you tell us more about the week and what participants should expect to learn throughout those
Yeah,
3 days?
absolutely. It's a really jam-packed week, but manageable. So it's it's weird to hear those two things put together, but it is something that I feel that over the course of the 4 days, people can participate as much as they possibly can. There's going to be a series of panels and keynotes, a mix of marketing and advertising professionals, talking about really what belonging means within their organizations with some really practical use cases. If anyone goes to advancingdiversity.org to register for the event, there's also an opportunity for you to submit resumes. We want to surface, not just in the event, but continuously as a part of our work, surface opportunities, particularly for, not exclusively, but particularly for younger people that are interested in being a part of the industry. So the expectations that we have is to deliver really tangible information around what belonging really means as that fourth pillar to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how that applies to organizations in their work, in their journey, which really impacts your particular journey within these organizations. If you're thinking about joining the industry, your psychological and mental well-being is largely going to impact whether or not you stay. It directly impacts the conversation that you asked me before, like how do we deal with work environments, the often emotional labor that goes into this, the way in which we are compensated, the way in which we are reviewed, all of those things are part of this conversation. So the week isn't designed to solve all of this. So despite the fact that we have a lot of ambition, our ambition isn't that outsized, but I think it is designed to be thought-provoking. It is designed to hold a mirror up to the industry, and it is designed to be as honest as we can possibly make the conversations.
I love that. We're excited for it, especially for, a few of the conversations I saw. I saw some conversations on gaming there. I mean, you all go really into it when we talk about the breadth of diversity in our industry overall, and not just as you mentioned throughout this entire Bold Voices series, not being one-sided within our thoughts on
Yeah.
diversity. What are some of your planned sessions, favorite planned sessions?
Oh,
I know you
well,
can't play favorites, but what are some of your favorites?
yeah, I will avoid playing favorites. I am going to be leading a one-to-one conversation with Ida Miriam Davis, who is the CEO and founder of Decolonized Design. I had the opportunity actually to interview her for a podcast that I do that is not the pool, called The Deep Dive. So we had a longer conversation. I believe that was like April or May. The time escapes me as to when that was, but we had a really long conversation, and I'm excited to be in conversation with her again. But beyond the personal plug, I really think that there's something for everybody. Each day is different. Each day has a different focus. There's a lot on there, as you highlighted. So, I would really encourage folks to take a look at the agenda, to explore the speakers and the tenor and tone of the conversations, and really find what works for them. I think in a world where we're kind of used to building out our own content offerings, this is a perfect opportunity for someone to do that. They can plug into exactly what most resonates with them. So there's a lot there.
I love that. Love that. Build your own experience. We always love.
Absolutely.
There are 10 new Advancing Diversity Hall of Honor inductees, ranging from Howard University, shout out to Howard, to Entertainment Studios with Byron Allen, the 4As, as well as Moby. In what ways are these inductees in advancing diversity, and what lessons can we take from them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that we're most proud of is that when we do an induction like this, that there's such a wide variety of organizations that are being inducted. And they're all different, which shows that the work of diversity encompasses everybody. So that's one of the things that's most important. And they're really inducted based on their ability to show that they have been a champion for diversity. They have active programs toward this work. They've had success. So this isn't the type of induction or honor that is just symbolism. You know, everyone that is being inducted has shown a roadmap of success. I like to say we're not new to this, and neither are they. So every time that we bring people into Advancing Diversity Hall of Honor, it's a testament to their work, it's a testament to their dedication, and it's something that they're going to be able to be working on and doing for long after we've had the induction itself. So I think everyone who dives into these organizations and takes a look at their track record will be really impressed with the work that they've been doing.
Absolutely. I'm inspired by all of them. Some definitely are both partners. Some we are just inspired by through the work, particularly many people of color, just overall everyone. And so we're excited about advancing diversity, and of course the 10 new inductees who join really a group of people who, to your point, have been doing the work, right? They're
Absolutely.
not new to this, they're true to it. And so congratulations to those 10 inductees for 2021. We're so
Absolutely.
excited for the work you'll continue to do there. Philip, it's been more than a pleasure having you here. I've learned so much. We could have a 2-hour discussion if it was up to me. But we always ask our Bold Voices members to really leave us with one thing, and that's telling us what inclusion means to them. So I'll ask you, what does inclusion mean to you?
Yeah, I've seen so many different definitions for for inclusion, and all of them are great, right? Like I've seen you're bringing your own seat to the table, or you're being asked to dance and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, geez, everybody's so social around these things. They're all around eating and dancing,
Or drinking.
or drinking. I'm gonna like leave all those definitions aside and really focus on the belonging piece, because that's what really brought us here. So I'm sorry I'm breaking the question, but like I said, I break rules. So I'm gonna be consistent in that up until the very end. And I think it's the focus on belonging that we really need to have here. Because again, the belonging is that psychological piece that really makes you feel like you can bring your whole self to an organization, or bring your whole self to your work. And that's really critical. This has been the work that, I mentioned Frantz Fanon at the beginning, whether it's Langston Hughes as well, we wear the mask. Like, these are the things that really impact our success in these industries. So the more that we can focus on belonging and that idea of psychological safety and our whole selves is where I would really want to spend our time. So I'll leave it on that note. Let's up the belonging in that sort of trifecta of words: diversity, inclusion, and equity.
The deep work, the work
Exactly.
the deep work, for sure. Philip, thank you so much. Where can people find you, and where can they find Advancing Diversity?
Oh, if you go to MediaVillage.org, if you go to advancingdiversity.org, you can find all of our work there. The site is overflowing with information. Finding me, you can find me on LinkedIn under my name, Philip McKenzie. I have my own website, philipmckenzie.com. You can find me there. The Deep Dive, which is my website, all those good things. Anywhere and everywhere, I'm very public and available to be found, both good and bad.
And we will, of course, have the links to both Advancing Diversity, MediaVillage, and Philip's work all in the transcript. So both listeners, you will be able to enjoy that just through clicking to everything. So Philip, thanks again. We appreciate your time. And that's it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. The questions were awesome. The conversation was awesome. You're right. We can go for hours, but we don't have that luxury
Yeah,
But hopefully we can do it again at another time. And I really appreciate your thoughts and your attention.
absolutely.